This is the second part of lecture 9. Uh, in the first part, we learned about the ingredients of yogurt production and the steps involved in yogurt production. So, in this part, we learn a common about the starter culture. Well, there is a common defects that may occur during milk fermentation, that is yogurt production, which is insufficient acid development. Okay, and this insufficient acid development is basically occur due to the starter culture that we used. Okay, so what are the causes behind this less acid production by lactic starter culture? Okay, so there are different causes such as the composition of the milk, uh, the presence of contamination, antibiotics or chemicals, changes in fermentation behavior, attacked by the fuzz, bacteriophage, insufficient or abnormal flavor development, ropiness, gasiness, bitterness. Okay, so all of this may cause due to the all of this may affect in the acid development by the starter culture. Okay, so let's try to get more idea about this. First, composition of milk. Okay, so the raw milk, they exert an inhibitory effect on the starter culture. So cause the raw milk, they may contain various natural inhibitors such as lactinin, lactoperoxidase, agglutinins, and lysozymes. Okay, so however, the good thing is most of these inhibitors, they are heat labile. Okay, so if they are just heated at 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds, easily, all of these inhibitors are completely destroyed, and so that's why the raw milk, we need to pasteurize the raw milk, and pasteurization is done in slightly higher temperature and for more longer time. Okay, so actually the pasteurization time, the pasteurization process, it destroys all of these inhibitors. Okay, so that's why we always have to actually do the pasteurization or heat the milk before we make the uh, yogurt. Okay, okay, so it was the raw milk and milk from mastitis. Mastitis means inflammation in the breast tissue. So uh, the animal which are infected, that means which have the mastitis, generally does not support the growth of lactic culture. Okay, because the composition of the milk collected from such infected animals is changed due to the mastitis. Okay, so for example, mastitis milk contains lower concentration of lactose and unhydrolyzed protein, a higher chloride content at a higher pH than the normal milk, and also a high leukocytes count in mastitis milk. The mastitis milk, they contain high amount of leukocytes because these animals have infection, so that's why it's normal that the amount of leukocytes will be higher. Okay, and these higher leukocytes inhibit the growth of lactic bacteria by phagocytic action. Okay, then colostrum and high lactation milk. Okay, so this also contain non-specific agglutinins which clump and precipitate the starter culture. Okay, this was the composition of milk which affect the insufficient acid development. Then contaminating microbes. So contaminants, if there is contaminants microbe in the structured culture, they will affect the growth of those starter culture. Okay, and then presence of antibiotics and chemicals. So various antibiotics enter milk during antibiotic treatment of mastitis, and this inhibit the growth and acid production by lactic culture. Okay, and many sanitizing chemicals like quaternary ammonium compounds, iodine, chloride retard acid development by starter culture, and fatty acid also inhibit starters, and this fatty acid may develop due to partial hydrolysis of milk by lipases or maybe produced by lipolytic bacteria. Okay, and you know that various, I mean, not only for treating the mastitis, various antibiotics are also used in nowadays for cattle husbandry. Okay, so these antibiotics can also enter into the milk, and different sanitizers are used to sanitize the area where you husbandry the animals. Okay, so these sanitizing agents can also enter into the milk. Okay, and if it occurs, they will interfere with the lactic starter culture. Then changes in fermentation behavior. Okay, so after continuous use, the starter culture may change their fermentation activity and consequently produce lower amount of lactic acid. So actually that's why it's very important to maintain the starter culture. Okay, maintaining the starter culture in its correct condition is very important in the fermentation industry, because if the starter culture changes its behavior, it will affect the fermentation, and that effect is most of the time very deleterious. Okay, then phage action, bacteriophage action. Okay, so attack by bacteriophage is an important cause to slow acid production by lactic cultures, of course, because the phage, they destroy the bacteria. Okay, so when the phage has reached a maximum level, all sensitive bacterial cells are infected and lysed within 30 to 40 minutes. So, and when lysis occurs, acid production stops unless some resistant bacteria are present to carry out the fermentation. So, if the fermentation get attacked by bacteriophages, it may completely stop the fermentation process. Then, insufficient or abnormal flavor development. Okay, adequate production of lactic acid is essential for lowering the pH to a level where acetaldehyde, diacetyl, and other compounds are formed in sufficient quantity. Okay, and these are important for the desired flavor and texture of the yogurt. Okay, so if less acetic acid is produced, the pH will be higher, and these chemicals will be produced in lower amount, and thus the yogurt may develop abnormal flavor. Then ropiness, gaziness, bitterness. These are some effects of quality of the yogurts actually, and these defects are due to limited proteolytic activity of some starter strains. Okay, so if the starter strains have uh, less proteolytic activity, the yogurt may have this undesirable characters: ropiness, gaziness, bitterness, etc. Ropiness means sticky. Okay, so if you try different yogurts, you will see that different yogurts, their stickiness is different. Okay, so anyway, that's all for lecture 9. Thank you for your patience.